and I might just be. Now we are recording. Good. Welcome, everyone. Today is the 29th of April, 2021. Prometheus Dev Summit. Hello to the YouTube audience, and let's get started. The first topic is raised by Frederick, but he isn't here today, so maybe we need to skip it. Dynamic scrape intervals and scrape priority. Should we talk about this, or should we not talk about this while Frederick is not here?
I would not speak about it while Fred is not here because I don't know what this is about exactly.
For the dynamics, it's basically about allowing a different timing for. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but yeah, let's wait for Frederick. I'll move it back to the backlog. So we go to the alert manager moratorium and potentially removing it. Julian,
if there is a champion for the topic, we could do it, but
yeah, that doesn't seem.
Someone has to speak up. Okay, so there's none.
Okay, I'll put it back on the backlog. And Julian, over to you.
Yes, so I would like to discuss the removal of the moratorium for the alert manager notifiers because, like, I do see that the notifiers in alert manager are not the thing that are taking a lot of maintenance, and I would like to welcome more users and more direct integration with the alert manager. This should not be like the first class integrations because we have a very generic webhook notifier, but I can see some of first class integration that would make sense, potentially like maybe Microsoft Teams or, well, like we got a proposal 2 days ago, maybe Amazon SNS. So I would like that we lift the moratorium and then under the same conditions as the Prometheus service discoveries that we can accept more notifiers in the alert manager.
I like it. I mean, I think in general, it's a good time to freeze a lot of things that are effectively stuck at whatever SoundCloud needed 5 years ago. So, yeah.
Yeah. As the alert manager maintainer and not being very responsive on this project due to many other activities, but I share Bjorn's concern that first we need to make sure that the project is in a healthy state, but definitely agree that there is no real reason to restrict the integrations in alert manager as long as you've got enough people to take care of them and of the project in general. Yeah.
Yes. So actually, like when I say that this is the same rules as Prometheus, it means that they would need to find someone from team willing to maintain that and to keep that up to date, like we do for the service discoveries. And like the general issue of the alert manager not being maintained, we are actually like I plan to cut a release this week, and I plan to be maybe more involved in the close future. But I also know that we have the Cortex project, which is now a very active Downsampling project for alert manager, and I think that in the coming months we might have more participation from them directly in the alert manager upstream. That's what I hope, at least.
Yeah.
Yep.
I hope too that we manage to get more people on board from our side after that, definitely. So we'll take some time, but we'll get some help pretty soon.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's any problematic areas from, lack of maintaining resources in the alert manager, just kind of a general bandwidth thing.
This is very generic for the alert manager. If you look at the other project, Prometheus, we have a lot of maintainers already, and we welcome regularly new maintainers. And the exporters are in pretty good shape, I would say. Not all of them are very, very active, but they are still cutting releases. But in the case of the alert manager, we have a big gap since the last release that we actually need to close. And we have a pretty active maintainer for the UI part, which is Andre. But for the Go part currently, currently Simon is not able to be as responsive as we are on other projects, and there is also a backlog of issues that need to be tackled. But I think this is very specific to the Art Manager, and it is also partly due to the fact that the Art Manager is quite stable, actually, and the conversion is quite stable, so it doesn't need a new release except for new features, but there are no big bug fixes that need to go out. But we plan to cut a release, and yes, we also need to tackle the maintainership issue on the Art Manager.
Okay, thanks for the additional context.
Is this just a concern, or are you willing to step up, Richard?
I don't think I have enough bandwidth to actually move the needle much, so I wouldn't want to offer false hope. But there might be someone at AWS that could do so. Like we could.
Yeah, I mean, just for complete transparency, what Julien said is that there is activity in the Alert Manager through Cortex, and that's how we plan to bring in indeed activity. And we plan to use the Alert Manager, so there is going to be opportunity to maintain and contribute there.
What I also notice is that currently Cortex is actually adding feature on top of the Alert Manager without upstreaming them, if I can say that. So they are adding like rate limiting to the notifications, and they are also adding some other features. And I'm wondering if the trend will be that Cortex will add more features downstream and not upstream them, or if they will try to get more upstream and then benefit from them downstream.
Yeah, so the particular features that have been added recently, like I kind of think we saw them as not necessarily helpful outside Cortex as they're related to abuse in multi-tenant environments, like our scalability was the other one, right? So I don't know, maybe we were, at least maybe I was making a bad assumption about the interest in them.
It also tends to just be easier to put stuff into Cortex, and then if it flies, we can upstream it. But there's no reason why we wouldn't want to upstream it. We've just had difficulty getting things upstream before, right? So.
Yes, so we are in the situation where I also at some point proposed that some Cortex people got the maintainership, but like it seems this will still take a few weeks or months before this can be done.
I think, yeah, we will. Grafana Labs will be putting a lot more work into Alert Manager as well. We've got quite a lot of use of it internally. Is Josh on? I don't think Josh is on, is he? But yeah, like I think hopefully that will solve the problem, but you know, I can't promise anything now.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have loads of stakeholders and lots of people are interested in doing something, but of course we need that person that like shepherds everything into a consistent view, and ideally that would be a person with a bit of background in the history, because there are some like implications, and I know just a few of them, and Dunning-Kruger effect, that makes me be kind of concerned that there might be many little traps.
Okay. Just for completeness sake, I saw if Josh is able to jump on for 15 minutes. We'll see. Looking for, I mean, we can also look into the issue which Jerome linked, but I think that basically covers just one of those instances. Should we just make a call for consensus? Because the reading of the room is no one has anything against lifting the moratorium as long as we know how that work will be carried long term. Okay, so let's do that. So, consensus. Moratorium will be lifted. New integrations need a long-term maintenance plan. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Good, good. So, next topic, directly related, Björn, clarifying some intended semantics of muting in Load Manager.
Yeah, I mean, this is perfect segue into, we kind of, in this discussion, would be great to have people in there taking the lead, to have some history behind this. So I mean, we stumbled on this, whatever the proposition is, when the time-based muting was introduced, which is a great feature. So you can essentially say, yeah, I mean, I'm just monitoring a system, whatever, stock trading system during stock trading hours. I don't want to get alerts routed to my pager outside of business hours or something, right? So that's a pretty cool feature. And then we realized whenever you leave the mute period, then it takes, like, you don't get immediate notifications for all the firing alerts. It waits until the usual like group interval has passed. If your group interval is like 5 minutes, as it's often for critical stuff, that's not a big deal. But there are situations, especially for not so critical alerts, where you have like a group interval of 4 hours, for example. It's very common. And like, it's very anti-intuitive that at whatever, 8 in the morning, your work hours start, and only at perhaps 12, you get those notifications. And that is a similar thing. I mean, this all looped back into, I think, did I link it somewhere in the voting document? Otherwise, I will add the link in a second. There is an ancient issue where we discussed how alerts should be treated. Like, how should we notify if alerts get silenced? Yeah, exactly. Thanks. And I think this is related because this all goes into what's actually the semantics of muting. And I think at the moment, this is where like my sense of history of the project and internals is kind of where I notice how limited it is. I think there is just like the final step in this whole pipeline is the muting, may it be by silences or by inhibitions or by the new time-based thing. And this just doesn't touch at all how like groups are updated. And there is, in this long-standing issue, there was a lot of discussion if an alert that should get silenced, should it be counted as resolved by like the receivers, let's say PagerDuty? Should we send a resolve notification? Should we send like, now this is newly firing when it stops getting silenced? And this is all connected, right? And my experience is at the moment we don't send anything, right? And people are mostly confused, especially because like PagerDuty or I guess other receivers do the same. If like an alert isn't updated in a while, they auto-resolve it. So all of a sudden, the silence alert counts as resolved, but only implicitly. It's kind of weird. And yeah, I would really like to find a solution here that is consistent with all the historical implication we already have. Yeah, and I was hoping we would have collective wisdom here to discuss this quickly and sketch out the direction.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's pretty painful the way it is right now. We don't even use muting, right? We don't use any time-based stuff, but I've like several times a month, someone here is confused why they're not getting their resolve notification. So it's sorry, confused by Slack messages. So like, yes, I think this could be better. And I kind of feel like I agree that when you have a like day-night kind of cycle, getting all the everything that's outstanding at the beginning of the day is valuable.
Yeah, it's also like even if you don't use the new feature, if you just have a silence while this data center is under maintenance and then the silence expires and there is an alert has started to legitimately fire and your group interval is 4 hours, you might only get it after 4 hours.
Yeah, I am wondering about that because in my experience, you get them pretty quickly. And the only issue is when the group interval is bigger than the silence or is bigger than the inhibition. So I'm wondering if everything you say is accurate? I guess it is, but then this is not what I did notice. Usually I get all my alerts at 8 in the morning, even with a group interval of 2, 4, 3, 5 hours.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be that I got something wrong, but that's exactly the reason, right? I mean, ideally, we have one among us who has the deeper insight and can kind of understands the current situation and can sketch out a solution. But I guess we don't have that at the moment. The wisdom went away with people leaving the project. But then someone has to sit down, find out all of this, and has to sketch out a solution.
I mean, we could try getting back to Stuart and see if he remembers anything about it.
So
I think he wrote much of that.
When I digged into the GitHub history, the comments I did see was that like we should never have introduced resolve notifications. I don't think that's an acceptable answer, but that's what I did read in the history. And I think that's the kind of reasons why there was no investments in getting this right or better for the users.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think the mismatch is between repeated sending of something and communicating the state of something. And right now, we only communicate the state through repeated sending, but we don't really have a guarantee for like, okay, so how long do you need to wait, right? How long does PagerDuty need to wait for us to stop sending that it's still bad to assume that it's good again, right? And on the other hand, if we mute the "it's good again" notification, we just wait for whatever that, like, however patient that receiver is, and I think that's somewhere there is a mismatch there.
I mean, my hope kind of is if we invert the order and essentially make muting something that happens as the very first step in the pipeline, and if we mute anything, it's the same thing as if it's not firing, then I think we would circumvent a lot of those problems. And it might be weird that muting, I mean, I think this was the original concern, that a silence alert is not the same thing as a not firing alert. But if we could say, okay, if we buy into this semantic, that silence, or muted in any case, is like non-firing, then a lot of this would go away. But I'm not sure this has to be thought through. I mean, one thing, for example, is that the routing we have now isn't the time-based muting is in the routing tree, and you can only route something once it's firing, right? and so this might have some weird circles in it, but this is what I would like. I mean, if I had infinite time, I would just sit down and think this through. I don't have infinite time, and ideally we could kind of put this out as a task and someone could pick it up. But that would be the idea I would like to kind of give as an input.
I mean, as an alternative semantic, what I could imagine might work, but also needs to be thought through, is that basically later stages in the pipeline can pull through and say, send everything again, right? Something has changed about mutings, just like public or like reverse calculate what needs to be resent now. I don't know how practical that is.
But couldn't we also just mark it early on as having been muted, run through everything which we want to run through, and at the end, before it's actually being sent out, then stop it because it has the mute flag?
It might be what we're doing. It's just the thing, like if we have all those semantics for alerts when they fire or not fire, and how long to wait and when to resend the notification. And my hope is we could just piggyback on that and don't have like a separate layer of semantics, what to do when it's muted, but not really stop firing.
But I mean, is the question there is, right, when it goes into the muted state, do we want to send a resolve notification?
Yes, I mean, I think we should, but that might already be a fallacy, which has to be thought through. But if we do, then perhaps we can actually make this whole muting decision, like let it be something quite early.
Well, my preference would be that we let that option to the user to decide what they want, or even maybe have like a flag to decide which kind of behavior you would like to want. I don't think we can solve that today, but that we can accept a design document which thinks about the different options, and then we can decide how to move on. The issue there is that I don't think anyone gets 100% the current behavior right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very confusing topic, and yeah, if various, I mean, if a different semantics requires kind of a very different basic design, then we cannot just make it switchable by a flag, right? We need some understanding of the semantics we want.
So maybe we start by asking the community for input on like what are the problems you're having with this, and also can someone actually like figure out what exactly is happening there.
And that is also a good time to remind everyone who's on the call and not Prometheus team that you're free to speak at any time. So
yeah, I was gonna add that I think like the two kind of like follow-ups make sense, but the first one might work a little better if you ask how they want it to work rather than just what their problems are. If the question is how it should work, like semantically.
Right, I suspect that we don't even know about all the edge cases that the current semantics cause, but we can phrase that basically as like how would you want it to work, and what's different than it is now. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Like the positive.
I think you might get more constructive or clear answers than complaining about whatever edge case someone hit.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what we could end up with is just kind of a statement of feature requests and problems, and then someone has to go from there and see if there's a solution that can satisfy all of that.
Yeah, but I think at the moment we don't have enough of a view of what actually is going on and what the needs are to really say, like, I don't feel like we have a coherent picture of this is what it's like right now, and without that we can't really say how it should be changed. But this is something that I think we can farm out to the community as well. We don't have to do everything ourselves to some extent.
Okay, so step 1, user survey. Step 2, find out how feasible that is.
Yeah, I mean, we can do the usual dance where we just put out a relatively empty design doc and just see what people actually write in as whatever the concerns are, or approaches, or just anything. So for the consensus,
I would take out, in line with Anton's comment, I would take out the current pain points and just leave in desired behavior.
I think collecting them makes sense. It doesn't mean that we need to address everything. It doesn't mean that we need to agree with everything. But I would much rather collect more feedback rather than less, because we can always do the rough consensus thing where we say, okay, this has been considered, but we disagree, and we just don't want to deal with this, or we don't want to take this approach, or we don't think it is a pain point. But I think at least collecting it without making any promises of fixing it would make sense. Is that fair, Matthias?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it makes sense because some way people want it to work might not be something we can support at the end in Prometheus. So I getting more feedback at the first place. I remember some users who wanted to send like alerts below 1 second, that kind of things, and don't think that this is something we should, for example, address directly.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also interesting to have a survey of like what is it that people want, right? And where is the intersection with what's reasonable for us to do?
Yeah. So consensus, and just to for this is the only part where ideally only Prometheus team raise their voices and their hands, so it's easier for me to see. Consensus. We will create a document for the community, collect current pain points, and decide behavior. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Very good. Tom, I don't know if you noticed, but Josh joined. So if you want to jump back, we can, or we can just move on.
I just for Josh's interest, we were just talking about whether Grafana Labs would help out with maintenance on Alert Manager, and you weren't here, Josh, so I volunteered you to do it all.
Sorry, Tom. Say the last part. It's probably a joke, right?
Yeah, it was a joke. No, I just said that you and your team will be doing work on Alert Manager in the future, and hopefully have time to help out there, and maybe that leads to maintain a ship if you contribute. Maybe it doesn't. Who knows?
Yeah, I agree. I've been trying to encourage everyone that makes changes to Cortex, or either in Grafana to just like upstream it straight away, in hopes that we don't leave it for last, and contribute everything back up. So
Yep.
Hopefully I get the bandwidth to work more on the Alert Manager in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, we need one who understands this dark art of pipelines in the Alert Manager.
Slowly getting there.
On that topic, actually, I'm wondering if there are ways, and I think this depends on the maintainer of this of each project, if there are ways that we can help Simon maintain the Alert Manager, say by helping people work on their PRs and get them into a good shape, so that in the end, ideally, when the actual maintainer comes around, all they have to do is hit the merge button and move on. But I don't know in what form that would be good.
Yeah, I think I've already got help from Bjorn and Julian, who I trust to eat the merge button if they think the PR is in a good shape.
Although, like, it feels for me a bit like I'm just doing kind of when the pain is really, I kind of am affected, or I see teammates affected, and then I try to expedite something. But this is really like so much best effort in the worst sense. and then I kind of don't want to discourage others by saying, oh, okay, someone is already helping. I actually would like more to chime in here. And yeah, I mean, I think we also need kind of the person in charge eventually, even if others contribute a lot. That would be the best thing, of course. But yeah, we need more people helping here, and eventually we need that person who is on top of all of things. And I don't feel I could be that person. I'm just too confused.
Maybe worth mentioning is that Gotham's here. I spoke with Gotham this week, and I believe he also has planned on taking a little bit more of care in the Alert Manager.
I mean, when I implemented that the UI would immediately update if something gets muted and silenced. This was the moment when I thought I got it, right? I understood how all of this works, but this is so long ago and I forgot all of it. But I think we need more people who are in that state, right? Where they kind of have a grip on how this all works. And then they could also give good answers for our questions, like how can we solve those muting problems and stuff like that. Like, you both have the knowledge and the capacity to actually act on it. That would be the ideal case. Josh, you were supposed to say yes. You are looking forward to that.
Yes, I thought I'd said it before, but I didn't want to be over redundant. Yes, like the problem right now is mostly the capacity. We're endeavoring in big things at Grafana for the next month, basically. But after that release, we should have some bandwidth to contribute a lot more backup. Because in this round, I believe we have acquired a lot of the knowledge on how this works in the past 2 to 3 months. It's been exclusively working on that.
Ideally, we would also find a maintainer which is not working on Cortex because they swapped the clustering to implement their own. So all that part still needs a proper maintainer which knows the upstream code.
So we're still reusing some parts of it, and for the time being, the clustering, the old version of the clustering in Cortex will remain the same. I don't see everyone moving off that for the next year at least, because it's quite a steep change from one system to the other. So we have some time there, and we're still using some parts of that. It's not just all. Because we effectively keep the same protocol. What we replaced is the transfer mechanism. So the algorithm stays the same. It's just that we're using gRPC instead of TCP.
What prevents us from upstreaming that? Like, if it's better, it's better.
I mean, we're using the ring. It might be that we want to do that in the alert manager. For given the multi-tenancy nature of Cortex, it's something that we wanted to do because every other component uses the ring. But I'm not sure there's like immediate benefits for that. And it'd be, yeah, I'm not sure. We'll need to investigate on that one to see if it's worth upstreaming. So off the bat, I'll say no, because most people won't care about it. But there might be benefits in there.
Yep. Like we also made several trade-offs in the in the Cortex code that makes the API CA rather than AP, like the alert manager. So there's a bunch of changes that we made for a multi-tenant system, and a lot of those changes I don't think make sense upstream.
Okay. Just to check, should we move on or should we keep?
I think we can move on.
So next one is Julian, Prometheus for small devices.
Yes, so we know that there are a lot of users which use Prometheus and Raspberry Pis. We know that, and I think that some of the things that we implemented in the last years go against that, especially like if you look at the edge chunks or the fact that we are memory mapping a lot and like pre-allocating even a lot of things. And I think that we should make some of those behaviors like optional so that Prometheus can continue to work on those small devices. Especially like not everyone is still on ARM64 on the Raspberry Pis. The reason why is that because I think that getting like Prometheus working on those devices brings us a lot of users that can just then bring Prometheus maybe in their companies or in other places, and even like on edge devices. So I think that this is something that we should work on, or at least accept pull requests to reduce like the kind of requirements that you need to run Prometheus, even if there are trade-offs like it might be slower, that kind of things, which might not matter if you only have like 1,000 metrics. So I think that we should like officially as a project really consider those users and like really listen to them when they point at some issues they might have with their devices.
Could some of these be automatic? Like on 32-bit architectures, we just compile in a different implementation?
Yes, because currently, if you launch Prometheus in 32-bit, you get a warning in the starting that says, "Hey, please switch to 64-bit." But it means that we can detect if we are in such an architecture, and we could like not pre-allocate some memory maps. That kind of things could be done. Yes.
But before we actually go into really some tactical or technical implementation, can you share like how do you think the customers are using Prometheus on such devices? The reason why I'm asking is that like, do they need the whole functionality of a Prometheus server? Like, do they run the alert manager on their Raspberry Pi as well? Or is it more like they have a fleet of Raspberry Pi and they need like a Prometheus agent?
This is more like, oh, why do I need 500 megabytes on my SD card to run Prometheus? Because I only have 500 metrics. And the reason is because we pre-allocate chunks of 250. I don't know. That's what we have seen in the issues. And that's, I think, the kind of things, especially the pre-allocation and the memory mapping are stuff that could be optional. Also, maybe like the edge chunks could be optional in some architecture because we know there are limitations. Ben proposed that instead we enforce like a certain retention on those devices so that you could not make Prometheus shoot itself in the foot by saying, hey, I want to keep 2 years of data, that kind of things, which might be also an option. But I think that we should actually consider those users. To answer your question, those users are really like, I think, just monitoring how the Raspberry Pi is going. And yes, they need Grafana, they need Prometheus. I don't know if they use Alert Manager, but I have even some colleagues who just run a Pi to check their internet connectivity, that kind of things. That's what I see. So it's not like big users, but the fact that those users are able to run Prometheus seamlessly, I think is beneficial for the project and will then bring us more enterprise usage at the end.
And I mean, there's also the effect that to some extent you can't use Prometheus in small edge devices, so people don't. Right? So I think there is a large class of potential applications that are just not even being explored right now because everybody knows that you need a lot of memory to run Prometheus and a lot of disk. And you just don't have that on your fridge. But there is no reason your fridge couldn't implement its temperature graph with Prometheus.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of IoT use cases if the footprint's smaller that probably people are trying to, shove it hard enough to make it fit with what they can tune now or just using something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think this Prometheus starts up and just puts a few giant files on your disk. That's something we could probably tweak pretty easily, right? The whole M mapping thing, I think that's pretty deeply baked in. I remember this was one of the few things I actually discussed with Fabian about the storage, and his statement was essentially, we don't care about 32-bit users. Which is kind of a bit sad, but I also understand how weird it would become if we had done this. But on the other hand, if you have a tiny disk and the disk is actually smaller than like 2 gig, then you probably also don't need to nmap. Like it might actually work out, but then you still don't want to like pre-allocate gigantic chunks in the wall and everything, which you will never use. So one part, I think it's easy, and the other part, we'll have to see how that works out.
I think you need to split this out a little bit. 32 bits, I don't know how much impact this would have on the actual core users of Prometheus. But supporting just smaller devices seems almost obvious that it's a good thing. You can also see this from the perspective of an agent with a little bit more functionality than just the agent thing, which is very much an IoT and edge case or use case, as Richard just said. I just checked everything Raspberry Pi 3 and 4, they support ARM64. So I think it would be fair to say that we just don't support Raspberry Pi 1 and 2, which are the 32-bit versions, but to just make it possible to run on really tiny machines.
I mean, I wonder if, like, that's where I do wonder if the 32-bit restriction is it fundamental, right? Or could we build, could we abstract things enough that you can do it with mmap or with file open and seek, even if seeking around is a slower interface? Right?
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Like I've had a look at it mainly because of not just it's quite hard to mmap files from S3, so it's not just for the 32-bit use case, and it's a hell of a lot of work to properly abstract this away. That being said, it's something I'd love to do if I ever have the time, but I'm not
so
have time to do it.
If someone came around and said, "Here is my storage ARM32.go," can we would we accept it, or would we say no? We don't do 32-bit.
I mean, it kind of works if you use it, as long as you don't try and map too much stuff. It fails pretty quickly. The amount of work to make it properly swappable out is a huge amount. But if someone was willing to do it and we thought the code was decent quality, I think we should encourage that.
There's also though the knock-on impact of that's a whole different set of use cases that need to be tested for and stuff, because there's no point adding all that in and then in 6 months' time it doesn't work because nobody's maintained it because nobody uses it from the core team.
Yeah.
I mean, another approach that might work is what happened with Kubernetes and K3s, where there is essentially a fork that is optimized for small devices, that strips out some of the very expensive stuff, that replaces the storage implementation with something that's just easier to deal with and works on smaller devices. But it's a separate, at its root, a separate code base. I don't know how feasible that would be at the moment.
But we don't need to decide this. I think if we just say publicly that we would accept this, and either accept it as a modification to normal Prometheus, or give it a place in Prometheus or Prometheus community GitHub orgs, that should already be enough for someone who wants to carry that, to have a place to carry it while not impacting Prometheus.
No, and I mean, I think also in being mindful about how much we pre-allocate and how much space and memory we gobble up, just for starting the server, is a good thing in general. I mean, SoundCloud is on the way to running basically one Prometheus server per app, per region, per environment. And there are going to be some that have 50 megabytes of data, right? And I mean, yes, storage is not that expensive, but if we just pre-allocate 10 times as much just because, that's kind of a waste as well.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I was always, whenever we started with Kubernetes long ago, I thought we should have micro Prometheus that can just run in very small. And that is kind of the same thing to optimize for. I think there are a lot of easy gains, but just rewriting the storage completely to not need to mmap the whole storage will be very invasive. And I'm not sure if we could maintain that feasibly in parallel. I mean, there was in the early stages, the Prometheus 2 storage had the idea that you would only mmap the blocks that you're actually using. But because you have one block per time, right? For everything, if you just access a single time series over 15 days, you have to mmap the whole storage period, right? And that would be pretty deep, be pretty invasive redesign to break this up. So yeah, I'm not sure if there's an easy way out of that, but that doesn't prevent us from leveraging easy gains here. And I mean, 64-bit, it would be great to have a 20 megabyte Prometheus.
I mean, it's even if as long as we say we want we want to support this direction, and here are the things we know about are problematic. Other people can say, is it worth for them to do the work of fixing those?
So, I think there is consensus on 2 points. That we want to support small devices as long as they're 64-bit, and the other that if someone is actually willing to do the work to create a P3S, that we will find them a place in our GitHub org, and they can just do the work there and have it blessed officially, as long as they actually do the work.
I mean, what I would also say that if we can implement like non-invasive tweaks that ideally automatically just don't assume every single Prometheus is a huge server. Like if we have a reason to realize this is a server that hosts 1,000 metrics over a 3-day retention period, then it just thinks that they don't need half a gig of disk space for that.
But this, are you saying that this potential use case would have 64-bit or not?
This could be like the case of just have tons of micro Prometheus on your Kubernetes cluster would be a 64-bit use case without IoT, without all of that, and we would still want to have like a way to make Prometheus smaller, like scale into the other direction, right? Prometheus doesn't scale. It also applies to the other direction. And I think this is like synergizes, to use the word, with all the other things here.
Okay. Then let me rephrase to 64-bit machines, because I think that would then cover your proposal, correct?
Yeah, I mean, small use cases. I don't know if it has to be machines, but
yeah, I mean,
I wonder, like, should we, like, yes, making 32-bit work well with like large amounts of data would be a lot more work, but does that mean we need to exclude it right away?
No. I only want to raise the concern if it's a super invasive storage rewrite, it might be difficult to maintain in parallel, or even like it might be additional overhead to just have this pluggability essentially. Yeah, but yeah, it's not a no, we can't do this. It's just there are concerns and caveats.
I mean, for right now, as we don't have anyone who's stepping up to do it, Matthias, your comment seems to be largely theoretical. So having a positive consensus about what we want to support and not shutting down anything else is okay. Okay. So let's try this. Consensus. We want to support small 64-bit devices, machines, etc. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Okay. And consensus. We will give a potential P3S space in our GitHub orgs if someone steps up to do the work.
I mean, I know I said it, and I brought it up initially. I honestly wouldn't put it out there just yet. I would like to, like, tactically, I would rather see how far we get with Prometheus. And I mean, K3S is also outside of the core Kubernetes because Kubernetes decided that this isn't the direction they want to go in.
Which is precisely why I said that we would give them space in our org to avoid this divergence. I mean, we can shove in a third consensus in between that if we find out that supporting 32 bits is easy, we just do it in Prometheus. That didn't sound to me as such, but we like if you want, we can also have a call for consensus on that one.
But is the second consensus only about 32-bit?
So what?
The second consensus, it's not about 32-bit either, right?
Yes, I need to write this actually. That's a good point.
Okay, now it's clearer for me.
Yeah, okay. My intention here was to basically split out the decision of small devices from the orthogonal consideration of 32-bit devices.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering if we are doing ourselves a favor by basically saying, like, fork it.
But,
I don't think we need the second consensus.
okay.
No.
Yeah, we can also delete it. I mean, at least this formulation didn't find any supporters anyway, or not enough, or not clear. So let's just try if this gets accepted, and if not, we just delete it.
I mean, we should be more. Or is this clear from the notes? No, I think we should be clear what we mean with P3S.
Also fair, but let's get intention first, because if we don't find consensus on the intention, then we don't have to document it. So let's first try this one. We want to support 32-bit devices, machines, etc. if possible, or if.
Yeah, possible is a big word, right?
Yeah, if low effort. If it. Consensus, we want to support 32-bit devices, machines, etc. if it turns out to be low effort and does not impact mainline. No? Okay, let's just delete everything and we have one consensus.
I mean, I like that we express that we don't just say no to 32-bit, right? It's not the reason like we don't care about 32-bit users. That's not the message we want to send, but we also don't want to send the message, yes, let's rewrite the storage so it works well with 32-bit again. So essentially, if somebody comes along with a PR that just adds a flag, if you set this, you only allocate 5 megabyte and not 500 on startup, we would not be opposed, right? If that's like not a non-invasive change. That's kind of the message I would like to see. But yeah, to say, please fork us and create P3S, yay, it's probably not the right message to send. Even if it's really needed, we might still discuss it.
So if we tack on a sentence of this would need to be discussed in a design document and need working code. Is this going where you want to go, or do you want to propose?
No, I mean, somebody could re-implement the storage and say, this is working code, and we might then say, no, that's not what we wanted. I mean, I'm more into, if there's something that is essentially non-invasive and easy to just have in the code base without slowing down the work on the regular use cases, that's fine, right? But rewriting the storage mainly driven by the desire to support 32-bit would not be fine.
For the forking option, people have that option today anyway. So is it even worth sort of having a consensus at this point that if in the future somebody does do that, then there's a discussion about whether A, they would want it in the Prometheus or Prometheus community orgs, or whether we would want it at that point, rather than preemptively saying it at this point that it makes it sound like we're looking for somebody to actively do it at the moment.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, we all agree if someone is doing this, we won't point fingers at them. We might even just put it into the org or the community org, but we don't have to phrase that now, right? I mean, we can discuss it when it comes up.
Yeah. So for the 32-bit thing, I feel like we all want the same thing. It's just about how do we phrase it sensibly, right?
Let's try this wording, and if not, just write your own. But I think I have something which covers everything. We want to support 32-bit devices, machines, etc. This would need to keep our main use cases intact, be discussed in a design document, and require approval by Prometheus team.
I still think that we want to support small 32-byte devices is really big words.
We are okay.
I think that it should be more like we are open to get more tuning options to get Prometheus working, something like that.
Yeah. Already in. We are open to supporting small 32-bit devices, so we are open to supporting, and then everything else the same. Will that find consensus?
I mean, what I'm struggling with is we're talking about 32, like anything that has to do with 32-bit, but what we really mean is we don't want people to go rewrite the storage engine. And there are potentially other things that are 32-bit specific that don't maybe need a full design document.
Yeah, especially
So
like
can we make it? Could we be explicit and say changes to the storage engine need a design document?
Yeah, or maybe you could say invasive changes would need a design document or something like that.
I like that. Yeah,
that's no new thing. Like every invasive change needs a design document, whether it's storage or 30-bit related or not, and every change needs approval by a Prometheus team member, otherwise you can't merge it. So this is all nothing new, right? The only sentence we need is we are open to tweaks towards 32-bit support if they are not too invasive.
Yeah.
That's
kind
of what we understand.
It's fair that it's not formally a new thing, and formally it doesn't matter if it's in or out. It's a statement. So if more people feel comfortable with it, if we make this as a statement, I would not object to having the sentences in there that are about things that are usually the case anyway.
Okay, let's try this one. Consensus. We are open to supporting small 32-bit devices, machines, etc. if the required changes are not too invasive. Coupled to a second one, optionally. Consensus. If it makes sense, we are open to hosting a K3S-like P3S in our GitHub orgs.
So yes to the first, no to the second. I don't think it makes sense to talk about forks at this point.
Okay.
Like Stuart said, when that comes up, then we can have that discussion.
Okay. Already deleted?
Yeah.
Consensus. We are open to supporting small 32-bit devices, machines, etc. if the required changes are not too invasive.
I like it.
Agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Yay. Point of order, we are at 1 hour.
Yeah, let's have 5-minute coffee. 8 minutes, so we can start at 5:10.
Okay. So see you all in 10 minutes, in 8 minutes or 7.5 minutes.
Yeah. Cool.
Ben wins.
Rich, I don't know if I don't think I replied, but I'll be on the call on Tuesday.
Yep, perfect. As this is recording and everyone else will be wondering what we're talking about, this is talking documentation. Oh, Ben turned off the cat. Boo, Ben, boo.
Boo. Yep, cat wanted to be off the camera.
So, testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Oh, hi.
Hello, person who is not a cat.
All right, fine. I'll put the cat back on.
Way better. So ideally, the people who are back, if you could switch on your camera, that gives us good indication. So in particular, Bartik and Ganesh would be useful. Okay. I mean, we can also do something else other than post modifiers. I'm trying to align a little bit with who's actually on the call, with who voted and how. Downsampling is also not good. I mean, we can also just get started on post modifiers. I suspect Ganesh can jump in. Oh no, I see him actually in the document, so I presume that Ganesh is around.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. So Bartik, Ganesh, the stage is yours. Post modifiers.
Let me see. Bartek had some query on this. Yeah, the post modifiers, we are still not sure how the post modifiers should look. One of the ideas was having pipe symbols or pipe with some other symbol to define the post modifiers, but the query is something different. Should the implementation for this post modifier stay with the PromQL engine code, or it should be something separate that is to be implemented? That's the main question, I guess, from what Bartek wrote. Anyone has any strong opinions on this? The initial idea was we keep the implementation of all these post modifiers separately. The PromQL will help split those particular parts, give it to some other engine that takes care of identifying these and run on the result without needing to add additional complexity in PromQL itself. But if you think it should stay in PromQL to do some kind of optimization if required, I think that's the question.
So I think that if it's outside of PromQL, it should also be outside of the expression, and then be a separated parameter in the query or that kind of things. I don't think we should try to have all of that inside PromQL expression. I also think that originally the idea was to add modifiers and remove some function that would be like duplicates of the modifiers. And I think that then we should, if we put that out of PromQL, that we should keep those functions.
Random thought. No matter if we modify PromQL or if we have this as a separate thing, syntactically speaking, we would be able to just have one input field and detect post modifiers. And no matter how we treat it on the backend, we could actually allow both putting everything into one single input field or just sending it to two different query endpoints or what have you.
So what I'm trying to avoid is a user which is using the modifiers inside Prometheus UI and cannot copy paste that directly inside the rule.
Yeah, that makes sense to make it part of PromQL.
But you could also detect that someone did this. You could even in theory just drop that part of the rule completely and just emit an error or a warning.
But then should we do that recursively with the subqueries? That kind of things comes into my mind.
I'm wondering where we would have subqueries, which are then post-processed and fed back into a layer above.
So if we take an example of post-processing stuff that I would find useful is the limit that I would use, for example, inside a query that I would run in an annotation, in an alert to say like, hey, I am doing that with stop K now, but like, oh, we have like 50 endpoint failing, and here is an example of 10 of them, for example.
Okay, I'm kind of convinced that it should be part of PromQL.
I spoke up on this like a month or two ago. I think it should all be part of PromQL, but I don't want to be really strong on that because I also don't have the time to make it part of PromQL.
And talking about supporting on subqueries, I think the initial idea was this post modifiers would be on the entire query and cannot be applied on some subquery inside a query to keep it simple.
But thinking this through, if those post modifiers are actually required to at least return something which looks like somewhat which was produced by valid PromQL without any post modifiers, it could easily be part of a subquery, as long as the output properties of the whole thing are nice, compatible.
So the examples we've given for where this would be useful, right, are one of them's already been solved with the app modifier in PromQL, and I think that's a better solution. The other one is like sorting by label values and everything, and I think there should be a function that allows you to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, adding extra parameters to queries means every client that wants to take advantage of this needs to change. Like it would mean a new text box in Grafana, a new DSL for describing these modifiers. Like this just all seems like, why not just make it part of PromQL? That was the arguments I made a couple of months ago though. So
yeah, I mean the trade-off, do we make PromQL more complicated and perhaps even run into weird corner cases we didn't anticipate, or do we make it more complicated for those using it, right? And at least that separates it quite clearly. But as Richie said, right, you could just process the rich PromQL query into a classic PromQL query plus post-processor, and then there might be things that are just not possible, but we could forbid them in the rich PromQL as well. So I think the separation could be done in either case. It's just kind of an enforced separation if it's a separate thing in the API, but I'm also not sure if it's worth the burden. We put the burden on all the people implementing the API and using the API.
Yeah, so what I see,
because if it works one way, or at least seems to work one way in the Prometheus UI, and it's different everywhere else, then everyone gets confused.
And Thomas, a good point that I think this can all be solved with one or two options, one or two functions that we would need to add. Just like the consensus was so far, or what was applied so far, is that PromQL does not touch the label values, or it really tries not to think about that. But we can change that and say that, hey, no, PromQL will be able to sort on that kind of labels, and then it would work everywhere.
So you just need a consistent syntax to how to say that this is a filter thing, and whether it works with subqueries and so on as well.
Well, if it is a function, it works in subqueries. If it is a function, we check all the boxes, except that it is not like printed as a post modifier.
Yeah, I could imagine some people think about like those pipe-like syntax as in LogQL, but I don't know. I think we came up with the post processors because we thought a few things would be really weird within PromQL, but now we have the add modifier, which already kind of proves a relatively elegant way of doing some of the more hairy things. So I think we should perhaps modify the consensus as in, if we run through something that is really totally weird to do in PromQL, we can still pull out this idea of post-processing. But for the time being, let's just try to do it in full PromQL. with like having in mind that we don't want to do something that breaks PromQL consistency or something.
And I also note that using pipe seems like not an option, since it would conflict with Loki and it would not be nice to them.
Yeah, but we talked about different piping, right? So we have like a pipe and some other characters. So we kind of consider all of these options, yeah. And we kind of spent a lot of time with Gayatri to kind of mentor her in this area. But yeah, we realized that the PromQL part would be the best for users and UI and everything. So if we can have like experimental portion, and that would be amazing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest is, does this want to be experimental so we can change our minds if it doesn't quite work the way we'd hoped?
The more I think about it, the more like just putting it into main PromQL. What is the inherent reason why we should disallow a sort by label descending and then have another function limit 10 and basically just allow people to build this? They can make footguns with this, yes, but there's so many ways to build footguns with a Turing complete language. Why not allow it?
Yes, but why not allowing more functions? This is easiest. This does not change a lot of...
No, that's my point. To allow it as a function, and just similar to what Björn just said, I was basically agreeing with Björn. There is no inherent reason why we have to put all of this in post-processing. We can just make it clear in the documentation and such that these are functions which usually should be used last. Of course, they cost time, and they will lead to weird effects if you use them in subqueries and such. And beyond this, let the user run wild.
We already have that issue anyway with people using rate in the wrong places and stuff, so it's nothing new in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super passionate about if it's like nested syntax or pipe syntax or anything. I just think we should do either or. We should either keep it completely separate from the query language, or if it's in the text field, it's part of PromQL.
Yeah, I can agree with that for sure.
Yeah, but like the question now looks like is, are we doing functions or some separate process inside PromQL, right? That's a good question.
Function sounds
clear. Yep. Sorry.
I mean, let's try it. I think we would need a vote, because I think we have something binding from previously, but let's just try to get an informal consensus. Who of Prometheus team would be in favor of just tossing all of this into PromQL functions hidden behind the feature flag and calling it a day?
I don't think we need a feature flag, but...
Yeah, okay, that's Ganesh, Ben, Matthias, Björn?
I mean, I don't want to claim that will just work, but at least we can try.
Yeah. I'm all for trying.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So
I mean, I can also think about it the other way around, right? If everything is a function, why not have a pipeline form of PromQL, right? Like, why can't I type like, this is my metric selector, pipe rate, pipe sum, pipe divide.
Someone did that,
whatever.
by the way. There's a post processor that does exactly that, and I think it's really cool. I'll get a link and I'll share it. It's so cool.
I mean, it makes sense. The problem is many ways of doing the same thing. I'll be careful that there.
That's just basically a different parsing mechanism for the language, isn't it? It still results in the same internal representation. It's just
this is how Go templating works, right? You can write it in a function way, or you can write it in a pipe way. Not saying that we should go down that path, but it's
no, not at all. But I mean, I like experimenting with things, and it does seem like just making it functions in the current form. I mean, I think I originally pushed for separating like things that modify output from things that do calculations, but if the general consensus is that there is no clear line between the two, then let's make it all PromQL.
Well, I think that we could improve the documentation, and like if you look at JSONet, JSONet, they have mathematical functions. All they do is they just list them, and it does not take the same place as all the other functions. We have like, hey, by the way, this is the mathematical functions we have, and you just have the list and no description. And maybe this is just a documentation issue that we should split, maybe like the functions that modify stuff from the function that do the calculation. I don't know, but this is more like a documentation stuff than actually a problem of what's a function and what's not.
No. And with PromQL2, when we start enforcing types and proper ordering, then we can also make people, like, make it impossible to rate a sum. I mean, that's just thinking of way too much ahead. So yeah, let's try it.
Can I just, does anyone mind if I just share my screen quickly?
Yes, go for it.
This is it's called Pipers, pipe expressions in PromQL queries and more. And this is what it looks like. And I must, for one, I love this. I think this is awesome.
Ooh.
Now, I can understand it might not be everyone's taste. I actually don't think this is PromQL specific, but the examples they give are PromQL. Yeah, up here, look. And I just think this is fantastic. Like, I think this is wonderfully complicated. Probably a terrible idea for many reasons, but I love it. When we were doing LogQL v2 with Frederick, this was a direction for a while we were going in, where you could basically interchangeably do pipes and brackets, but we ended up settling on brackets for metrics and pipes for logs. And I'm glad we did. Like, I think the language looks really nice, not having two ways of doing everything. But yeah, anyway. To be clear, I'm not suggesting we actually do that. I just think it's fantastic.
This is out of scope for now, but one thing which I can easily see happening is having like a live parser into this thing to go back and forth to just be able to understand a few corner cases of PromQL easier. Let's try for consensus, because I think we already have one. We want to explore new functions in PromQL which cover the use cases above. Initial experimentation will be done behind the feature flag. I can't type. Okay. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Woohoo! Just need to fix typos. That's a pretty big one. Good. We don't have Frederick here. Should we talk downsampling in Tsdb?
I think Ben can speak about that.
Okay. Then let's do it.
Yep.
Okay.
Basically, Thanos has a pretty nice downsampling implementation. We worked out quite a few minor bugs, and it's pretty reliable. Super works really well. I think we should do that in Prometheus too.
Yep.
So one thing I think Jacob, went into latest Thanos call, and he said that Cortex want to kind of experiment with different downsampling and maybe trying to play with the Thanos one. So that's kind of cool on this side. And I think there is one kind of question mark around Thanos downsampling. For example, we are having 3 different blocks. We could kind of have one and store really 3 different chunks for different resolutions and share the same index. So there are kind of opportunities to improve this, but yeah, why not?
So are you suggesting that we wait until Cortex experimentation is done, or are you saying just keep it as experimental for now?
I would say let's start if someone wants to, experiment with this, yeah. But I'm just giving context.
Okay. I mean, initially I had some questions around doing this completely live or doing it batch, doing it offline or not, editing or having a local copy and such. But I think all of those have been answered by just doing what Thanos does. So we can just delete this.
Yeah, it would have to be some kind of Go routine that in Prometheus versus the sidecar microservice style that Thanos does. Just like any normal compaction, compactions happen in Prometheus.
Okay, but this means nothing in PromTool or anything, do it in Prometheus proper.
Yeah, it should work.
I guess if we are doing it in Cortex, we would do it in the compactor.
Yeah, and the same is happening on Thanos, so that will be part, probably.
Okay. One thing, we should probably also support it in PromTool. So if you have offline copies while you migrate data or such, you can do it by hand if you want to. No?
The way the compact works in Thanos, it just finds anything that's downsampleable and applies it from oldest to newest.
My point is maybe I have data on disk and I want to compress it, but I don't want to add any new data. I don't want to currently run a Prometheus on that live data. I don't want to append any data. I just want to do this by hand. Well, okay, it's an implementation detail.
You could make it part of PromTool or something.
Yeah, that was my point, that once we have that functionality, that PromTool should maybe also support it. So you just can do it if you want to, as part of whatever pipeline you have.
Just one thing, as maintainer of Prometheus, I would not depend on Thanos code, because then we end up in a real spaghetti dependency tree. But I am really fine with taking code from Thanos and keeping their copyright on them. And I think Apache 2 allows us to do that.
We could ask the Thanos people to library it out.
Yeah.
Exactly, or we can, vendor it in Prometheus and actually do it in Prometheus, and then Thanos is importing Prometheus. So yeah, all options are possible.
Yeah, I think upstreaming makes sense. The only question is, should we upstream this before all other experiments are done or not?
I mean, how much do we lock ourselves in if we upstream it now?
The only potential thing might be that the resulting downsampling is in some way incompatible with the then new downsampling, and certain assumptions about how the downsampling worked were then broken when you query the data or some such. But I don't know if that's a realistic concern, but that's the only concern I can think of.
I mean, I don't know. It depends on how we store it, but I'm guessing if that happens, we could just discard the old downsampled stuff and do it again.
Well, not if you don't have the actual data, yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, that's my point. If you have lossy compression and then you realize that you don't need to look at the last, you need to look at the middle or the first or what have you, like one of those fundamental things which changes the mathematical properties of the data, and you don't have the original anymore. But that doesn't seem to be a strong concern, and as long as it's behind a feature flag, whatever.
And I mean, it's something that if that happens, we would have to solve it, or like Thanos would have to solve it anyway. So whatever Thanos comes up with for solving that, we can apply that to the local storage as well.
Yeah, so one thing important to note is that if you do downsampling, it is because you want to keep data for a long time. So if we put something out there, we will need to support it for a long time.
Which is why we put it behind experiment until we're confident we can do that.
For 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think making it experimental is definitely good. And then once all the experimentation is done, right? If it's experimental, we can also basically say, yeah, sorry.
We need to make this extra clear that there might be a case, however unlikely, that you're actually not able to use that anymore. But I think Julian is right that this will be a much larger problem for Thanos than it would be for Prometheus anyway. So whatever might come out of this would need to be solved by Thanos anyway.
Just curious, maybe let's understand what exactly we are looking for with downsampling here. Are we looking for ability to do a fast queries over a long period of time, or are we looking to use less storage?
I think less storage. No?
I think more, for me, it's more about the queries over a long time. It's something that we have big problems with.
Yeah, for me, it's more the side of just like dropping a lot of blocks that I don't need, but still being able to see some data from 1 year ago. And don't need to install S3.
So it sounds like both then.
We're currently at 2 votes for each.
Yeah, that's why, Julian, I think you mentioned that this is connected with the pair series retention that we kind of want to start with, Chris, right?
Yes.
So ability to essentially drop some of the data, downsample other part of the data, and then kind of have this. Yeah, that makes it more tricky. Yeah.
But I think it makes it tricky, but as long as we make it clear that this is experimental because it's tricky, and like it may end up being that you need to write the conversion code so that it still works and we don't throw away your data. If you care that much, then people can try and use it. Right? We just need to be clear that data loss or that we may just make changes that mean you have to throw away your old data. And I mean, even if that's the case, there is still the migration path of run an old Prometheus, run a new Prometheus, use Prom Migrator to copy the data over. It may get misaligned and it may be a bit wonky because we were looking at the last and not the middle, but at least you can carry your data over. So there is a way.
Thanks for linking, Bartek. Tom, as this is our Jakob Lisi, do you happen to know what time frame his experimentation would be on, or what directions he would be going? Okay.
No, it's the first I've heard of it, actually.
Okay. Gotham? Okay.
No idea.
I think Jacob wanted to explore first, but yeah, I don't know. We talked about on Thanos hours.
Okay, but so the question, I don't have a strong opinion either way. I just want to avoid us running into a situation where we regret it in 2 months or 6 months. So what's the feeling of the room? Should we? So first of all, do we agree that we want downsampling in Prometheus? And I think everyone agrees. So we can nail that down as a consensus, and then we can do the second one. Okay, consensus. So formally, consensus. We want to support downsampling. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Whoop, whoop. So, time frame. Who feels strongly about waiting until Cortex experiments are done? Who feels strongly about just doing it now?
Might be worth waiting to see what the experiments show.
Is there anyone who just wants to get started with this work already and is willing to toss away part of that work if it turns out that the other experiments are better?
I think that we did not have that feature, and having it for 2 months might not be worth it, or 3 months.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
especially that Tom or like other Grafana people are not aware of any kind of solid ideas, and I think Cortex has 1 day block, for example, size, so that's already kind of blocking some kind of downsampling we can apply. So given that, I don't think there is any blocker on trying it out if anyone wants to try, right?
Yeah, I don't think we should be anyone from Cortex or Grafana Lab should be blocking this.
Okay. Just FYI, Jakob would be around, so we can also ask him to join the call to see what his actual plans are. Should we?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. Yep, he'll be joining. Hello, hello. Frederick is also joining. So, Jacob, for your information, we were just talking about downsampling in Prometheus. We agreed that we do want to have downsampling in Prometheus, and Bartek mentioned that you want to do some experiments within Cortex about how to do downsampling, and now we are wondering if those might be, like the results, if they might be incompatible with how the properties of the actual downsample data are within Cortex as opposed to Thanos, and if it makes sense to wait for your experiments to finish or not.
We haven't really started anything on our side. So I would, if there's an opportunity to do this in Prometheus, that's where I want to do it. That's all I'll say. So I would much rather converge on a solution in Prometheus than have to have divergent solutions in each project.
We would like to have a converged solution for all 3 projects. Anyway, the question is, do you have a timeline for your experiments or anything? Because we're trying to figure out if it makes sense to wait or if we should just...
I don't, because I don't even know if I'll be able to work on it this quarter, so there's no timeline right now.
Okay.
And I would say don't wait.
Okay. So then let's do the call for consensus. Thank you. You're also more than welcome to stay. I can't English today. Too much talking. Consensus. We will use Thanos version for now, and we will use the Thanos version for now and await Cortex experiments. All 3 projects should use the same solution in the end. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Good, good. So we have Frederick, so I think we can pull one forward. Where was this?
It was the dynamic scrape interval.
Yeah. Thank you. We shoved this on the back burner, Frederick, as you went there, and we wanted to have you here for this, but now we have you here. Dynamic scrape intervals and scrape priority.
All right. I think I don't think I remember dynamic scrape intervals, but I think what I meant was that we could configure it via relabeling. I think that was the idea. Basically, I think that there's a larger topic of like making more or less everything configurable via relabeling, because we kind of make it available for some things and not for others. I do think it makes sense for some things and not for others, but I feel like scrape interval should be possible through relabeling. And then the other thing was...
Can you talk about the use case a little bit? Because I'm a little bit lost about like why at all.
I mean, there are basically, I want it to be easier for kind of let's call them end users to choose the scrape interval themselves. So like in a Kubernetes cluster, for example, I want people to configure it via an annotation on their pods or something like that, right? And not necessarily have to go that route. So like, for example, one of the reasons why people love using the Prometheus operator is because it's kind of self-service monitoring, right? And I kind of don't want all of that necessarily to need to be in the Prometheus operator. As much as possible, I would want to be able to service that through Prometheus directly. And scrape interval is just one of those examples. Does that make sense?
What happens if someone samples in an invalid time, like an invalid duration, or relabels in an invalid duration?
So since we have the target limit, we can actually now set an error for a specific target that will like Prometheus will not scrape it, but like in the default scrape interval, you would get an error and up equals 0 in Prometheus. And this does not require code change because we have made that work to have like generic errors already in Prometheus. So it would be up equals 0 and you would have the error.
Basically, the answer is the same thing as anything else when you relabel trash into a configuration label.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I also see another advantage in that a lot of people are using multiple script config where just one would be fine, and sometimes they use different tags. And then Prometheus is actually like using multiple connections to Kubernetes or to console, and they could just use one. They don't know that they can do that well nowadays by using reliable configs, but if we could like add another option for them to do that, this would be fine. I also know that we have always reserved everything except __meta and __tmp for future use, so we can actually add extra labels there without issues.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking, like __ scrape interval, right? Like continue that pattern. I guess it's kind of two topics. It seems like nobody's totally against this one. Should we do a vote on that one separately and then talk about scrape priority? Because I feel like that was more controversial last time we touched on it.
You probably know the scraping code better than I do, Frederick, but I actually think this might be quite tricky to implement.
Priority?
No, the relabeling for the scrape interval.
I was just thinking about the use case. I did not think about how difficult it would be to implement. I would need to as well.
I don't think it will be tricky to implement.
Okay.
You'd have to attach it to the target set before you pass it to service discovery.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be too bad, but you'd have to essentially look at all of the targets from service discovery and then split them into scrape pools based on the annotation, essentially.
Well, I don't think there is anything preventing us to have multiple intervals in one scrape pool.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I don't think we need more scrape pools. Because like we do the sleep like for each target individually.
Yeah.
So well, the tick, sorry. So this should not be an issue, and so.
Yeah, but that brings up an interesting point, though. At the very least, we should add to the targets page what the scrape interval is for a particular target, so that you know at a glance of the targets page, right, and not have to, I don't know, I guess you would need to look at the discovery page right now. If we do it via a label, that would be majorly confusing, I think. So at the very least, for this, it should be on the targets page as well. I think, Colin, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to agree.
I mean, we should not. We should take care not to overload the page itself too much. So maybe it can be behind like some drop down or like something that makes it. I mean, the thing is, especially if we add more and more of these parameters, right? Eventually, the target page just gets super long.
So my proposal would be just like we have a tooltip with the hidden labels, that we can have a tooltip on the last interval time when you can see, okay, this is a scrape interval for that target. A tooltip.
I like it. But I mean, that's kind of detail work. That
yes.
Yeah.
Agreed. It seems like we're not totally against it if it's reasonably possible technically. Shall we call a vote?
Yep. Consensus. We want to be able to configure scrape intervals via relabeling. I'll abstain myself because I'm not convinced, but I also will not block. So just to note it, but it doesn't need to be in the record.
Well, I know that this is one of the frequent feature requests we from users. So
I'm torn on the via relabeling part. That's where I'm torn. Maybe we can also split it into two, but I'm also fine just letting it run. Like I don't want to block it. I'm just not super convinced. I don't. Yeah.
Do you have an alternative proposal?
No, which is why I noted it, but I'm trying not to block it or anything, because it just smells weird. But
well, this is the same as configuring the target, the matrix path via relabeling.
Yeah, and the address and all of that. So it kind of, to me, it makes sense.
I guess relabeling would be there to stop the operator, or to enable the operator from having, teams that are deploying pods that have ridiculous scrape intervals and just being able to set a default, right? I think the normal use case would be that people set a pod annotation or something like that. And then the operator can see, oh, they're setting it to something ridiculous like 1 second. And I'm just going to say that every Kubernetes pod is scraped 15 seconds or something like that.
I mean, the operator can already do that by looking at the pod monitors, but I think the use case is more about the classic Kubernetes, like the classic style Kubernetes scraping, where you don't have an operator, you just have one giant scrape everything in Kubernetes job, and then you filter it down and you configure it and you do everything with annotations.
Mm-hmm.
Or like something that's not Kubernetes at all, it's console or one of the other
Exactly.
sites.
Yeah. Easy to I mean, that's the thing, is that it applies to all equally, and you don't have to, and it makes it work. I think it makes sense just as an extension of what's already there.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it as well.
Yeah, it's in the configuration I was going to use for console, we wouldn't be able to. We'd have to configure 2 different console jobs in order to get different scrape intervals for different jobs. So it makes sense to have this.
It seems like we're kind of violently agreeing.
I think we already had call for consensus, but just to make sure, consensus, we want to be able to configure scrape intervals via relabeling. So scrape priority.
I seem to remember that we either started discussing this once before or kind of ended up at a point where we said if we can reasonably reasonably determine what like overloaded means, then we'd be open to discussing something like this. But like that's the thing that we would need to have before we can talk about priority. And I don't think we came to a conclusion on overloaded Prometheus server.
Yes.
I mean, in my opinion, the best signal of overloaded is whether you are able to keep up with compactions. But in a Prometheus world where blocks are time bound, like not space bound, that makes a little bit less sense.
I agree. I suppose another one could be like scrapes happening at expected scrape, or like insertions happening of scrapes happening at the interval that you expect, but those are like really vague terms, right?
It's been years since I ever saw like an ingestion queue in Prometheus. I feel like this is not where it breaks down.
I tend to agree. I think it's more of a, I mean, for most people, it tends to be a memory bottleneck, right? That they're doing something silly, why their Prometheus has some cardinality explosion or something, right? And that's what they want to prevent. So it seems like maybe the target and sample limit, and I think we had discussed like a series limit per target at one point. If we had those, maybe that's enough. I don't know. And the rest is like capacity planning.
One other bug I ran into was label length limits. Being able to configure that. I had a leaky piece of code that gave me megabyte labels.
I'm pretty sure like 2 Dev Summits ago or something, we already agreed on that.
Yeah, exactly. We have someone who is going to look into that.
So yeah, completely agree.
Inherently, the problem I have with self-protecting against cardinality explosion somewhere else is, what if that happens in my priority 1 thing? Because then I'm still taking out everything, and then it becomes a little bit of a guessing game and not very much of protection. Whereas if you have static limits, where you say, if you go above X series per target or what have you, you can put same default values and have this protection evenly distributed, without basically triggering endless fights within teams about what is most important and highest priority.
And when I crash Prometheus, it is not in the ingestion path, but it is most of the time because I run a stupid query over 90 days.
Or 100 million theories, because that's like kind of, even if you have a cardinality explosion, the ingestion path is not what kills you. So I think I kind of heard Frederick say the same thing that Richie said. Rich is we don't need scrape priority at all if we have reasonable fixed limits.
Limits which are fixed but user configurable.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like the only limit, and kind of my further thought was, I think the only limit that we hadn't discussed before was the ability to limit the active series a target can have. Now, I'm not totally sure about the kind of viability of implementation of this, but I feel like that may be one that we don't have today. We can limit what is ingested, how many samples are ingested by a scrape. We can limit how many targets can be discovered by a discovery configuration. And we will have label value and length limits. So it seems like series is active series.
I see. The gap would be if you have one target that's just presenting a different label value every time you scrape. I think that's a problem we can solve once we've solved the easier ones.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just thinking out loud the kind of attack vectors or something that are left.
Yeah, but I feel like even there, like scrape priority would not really help. It would make you wander around the problem in unpredictable ways.
Probably, yeah. I agree.
And I mean, that's not to say that we should never consider scrape priority, right? I just think getting reasonable, getting the limit thing sorted means then we can see what remains.
Yeah. I think that's a good point that we can do this first. I strongly believe we won't need the second step, but doing it first. Yeah. We also, I think, yeah, we're at time, so let's do the call for consensus. While I write, I just want everyone to appreciate how Julian said when he makes Prometheus explode, not if.
I have to bounce, I'm afraid, but I'm in on more limits.
Oh, thank you. See ya.
Right.
But like this is the consensus we already have.
There we have it twice. We need an outcome for the last 5 minutes of this.
I mean, I think the outcome is not that we want the limits, but that we want to not do scrap priority until we have them.
Yeah, that is.
But there's also a lot of people dropping out now, so maybe that's just.
Yeah. So anyone from Prometheus team, if you drop, please make it clear if you agree on the general thing, or we just don't have a call for consensus. It's also fine. Only ones we have experience with.
Yeah, it's fine. I like the active series limit. I think I will be looking for that. Do we need any consensus on this, or?
Let me read it out once. Consensus. We want to include more user configurable limits. Only once we have experience with them will we consider scrape priorities.
Sure.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Just Bartek, if you look at that, we already have a metric for churn, and like this should be quite easy to do.
It's an estimation, though.
Yeah.
So that's why I said I'm not sure about the viability of the implementation, because I remember discussing this a couple of years ago, and it was definitely a difficult thing to determine. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it needs thorough work.
But we can also even consider to do this as an estimation and make it super clear. Like if we literally call this an able experimental estimation limit, people will know what they'll be getting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like quotas on like services tend to be fuzzy as well, right? Like you have a 10% like burst or whatever. So like if it's like that, people are probably happy with it anyways.
I forgot where we had the discussion, but basically starting to discern between soft and hard quotas would just be using industry terms, and everyone knows what they'll be getting.
Yeah, I'd be happy with that. I guess all that's needed is kind of a proposal and like determine just how precise or imprecise an implementation would be.
I think it's fair to set limits on estimates. If you say, like, this is the estimate, if the estimation just doesn't work for your use case, disable the limit or like set it to max int. Done. Right.
Sounds good. I gotta drop. See ya.
See you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.